Everyone. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second last of this year's lectures by the Carlow Historical and Archaeological Society. Just very quickly, if you have mobile phones, please switch them to silent or off so they don't interrupt. Before we start tonight, one thing I'd like to do is congratulate one of our members from Bridget Fox. Bridget gave a tour of St. Nolan's during Heritage Week, and the Heritage Council have awarded her, as of today, the Heritage Hero Award in advance of the awards that will be presented on Thursday. Finally, if you are interested in local history and want to support us, membership are available. €15 per year individual membership, 25 for family membership. And for anyone who joins tonight, there's a free one of those going. Free book. If you buy it on Barrow Bridges, so it does the bridges of the Barrow and the history from source to sea. If you're to buy it on Amazon as of this week, it's £20. Anyway, tonight's lecture. The reason I'm up here tonight is that Richard, our president, is away and couldn't make it, and our deputy president is here. So Nial is a graduate in archaeology from NUIG. He has worked in the archaeological field for over 20 years, been involved in many excavations over those years, and has very good knowledge of, let's say, all of the sort of the practical stuff on archaeology. Tonight's lecture, which was titled Giving a Castle Complex, Ballymoon Castle, will deal with all of those things about Ballymoon, which I always describe as an enigma. All the unanswered questions: was it finished? Was it not finished? Where it is at the moment. So I'll hand over to Niall, and let's be entertained for the next 40 minutes.
No pressure then. Thank you very much, Pádraig. I guess at the outset, I'd just like to dedicate this talk to my father, Eamon, who passed away earlier this year. Thanks. Okay, so Ballymoon Castle, unique among Irish castles in its design. So that was a phrase I picked out of Harold Leask's seminal article on Ballymoon Castle from 1944. I guess he wrote about the castle the first time it was written about in detail. And he covered things like dating, he covered the architectural features, he covered who may or may not have built it, and other thoughts that he had. But I suppose I put this up here now for us to look at, this particular photograph, because this is us approaching the castle from the road. And when you approach the castle from the road, I would imagine as a first-time visitor to Ballymoon Castle, you'd look at that and go, where's the castle? You wouldn't be sure because you don't see any battlement levels, you don't see any towers, you don't see the typical things that you would expect to see in a medieval castle. It's not until you go inside the castle that you get a much better idea of what it was and what was built. So this is again from Leake's article. So he drew out the structure of the castle. I suppose it's been attempted a few times since, but he did a very good job, so we can reuse it. So the castle itself, you enter through the gateway that's here. There is, we believe, a barbican here or a forework that it's shown in the foundations here that would have protected the gateway in and of itself. The gateway also had a portcullis, and this stairwell here was to go up and pull up and down the portcullis, so you could open and close the entranceway into the castle. The castle is a courtyard. It has ranges, so there was intended to be buildings around the inner here with a courtyard in the centre. One of the first things that you notice is on the first floor on this side, you see a double-hooded fireplace, a really large fireplace. Very obvious to anyone who goes in there, that was where the Great Hall was or was intended to be. And then as you go around the castle, what you also see is you see fireplaces, you see garderobes or latrines or toilets as you come around here. So it's pretty obvious to me, I guess, in looking at this, you see there are at least 7 garderobes or toilets in this medieval castle. And as we all know, we think back to a couple of generations and indoor plumbing didn't occur, and we're talking about 800 years ago. So this castle smacks of, to me, of a high status castle with several accommodation units, one definitely here, one here, and maybe another couple here, to entertain or accommodate several high-ranking guests. So the dating of the castle is being widely accepted. So I'm going to go through the basic stuff first here, and then we'll move on to the new research. So the dating of the castle was done by Leask, and it's pretty much agreed across the board. You have the arrow loops set into an embrasure. This is actually the same arrow loop from inside and outside the castle. And the feature of this is the circular ends, that the projection for the bowman to be able to have better range. So they're known to be late 1200s, early 1300s. And then over here you have a doorway. And if you look at the top of the doorway, it's referred to as a Carnarvon arch. It's not an arch, obviously, it's a lintel. But it's a style that's known from the castles of Edward I in Wales that date to the late 12th and early 13th century. So from these, it's widely accepted the castle dates to that period. So we come to the question, who built the castle? So I guess there are four main contenders, that we speak of. We speak of Edward I with Longshanks. We speak of Roger Bigott, who was the 5th Earl of Norfolk, and he was the Marshal of England, and he had control of the Liberty of Carlow at the time. The Carews were chief tenants in the area of Bigott, and then obviously the strongest kind of Gaelic Irish family in the region, the MacMurrough-Kavanaghs. So I think in the first instance, we can discount Edward I, because again, it's widely accepted that if it was built through the royal money, there would have been records of it. I think we can also discount the MacMurrough-Kavanaghs, because I don't think there's any way Roger Bigott, the Carews and so on would have allowed 10 years of building going on, because it would have taken 10 years at least to build the castle to what we see today, to be done by the Gaelic Irish. I also think it's probably not the Carews either. As a tenant, if you like, of Roger Bigott and the areas that they had, even though they were powerful, I don't think they were powerful enough to build something like this, something so large and ostentatious as this castle. So we're kind of coming then to Roger Bigott himself. So, as I say, he was a very powerful man in England. He was the Marshal of England. He was basically the finance minister. He held the treasury. He controlled that. He was probably second in many ways to Edward I in England. So who is Robert Bigott, and how did he come around to be in Carlow or to own parts of Carlow? So the early Anglo-Normans, as we know, Richard the Clare of Strongbow came over. He married Aoife MacMurrough. Their daughter, Isabel, inherited the Liberty of Carlow after them. She married the famous William Marshall, and they had, between them, they had 10 children. They had 5 boys and 5 girls, and all the boys died without leaving an heir. So they decided to split up their lands in Leinster between the 5 girls, and Maud got the Liberty of Carlow and a couple of other areas down in Wexford and Ballysacks up in Kildare. She married Hugh Bigott, the 3rd Earl of Norfolk. When they died, their eldest son, Roger Bigott, took over. And then when he died, he had no heirs either, and his nephew, also called Roger, took over. Okay, I'm going to go through some, I suppose, somewhat chronologically, just some important facts that I think date from this period that relate directly to Ballymoon and the story we're telling here. So in the 1270s, the MacMurroghs are raiding the Anglo-Norman colonies. It's well documented in the British sources that they're going around and they're causing havoc, right? They're attacking towns and monasteries and so on. Roger Bigott himself visits Ireland in 1279. There's a couple of reasons for that. The previous one I said, he came to try and deal with the MacMurroghs and try to guarantee the success of his colony here and the taxes he was getting from it. But it's also known that he came over and he dismissed his Sentinel, which is Robert Cockerell. The Sentinel is essentially the estate manager. He controls everything from taxes to the legal framework, the political, the social, the economic, everything. And he appoints all the people under him. So if you have a good Sentinel, it says your colony or your will do quite well. But if you don't, you won't get much from it. So he dismisses him and he appoints William Cadell. And he also meets with the MacMurroghs and he comes to terms. So there's agreements made there. And they're actually, as you saw in a previous slide there, Aoife MacMurrough was his great-great-grandmother. So there's actually there's a family relationship there between the two of them. Okay, so then in 1280, Bigott himself establishes a manor at Fenagh. And then also in 1280, a levy is in place on the entire county to strengthen Fenagh Castle. And then also in 1280, he brings over this master mason, Ralph Guggen, I think it's pronounced. He travels over from London to inspect the works at Fenagh. I suppose for me, when I first read this, I found this a little strange. I found there is obviously, as we know, there's no upstanding castle in Fenagh, right? There is one reference from the early 1800s when they were renovating the church in Fenagh, that they found something in the foundations that they believed were foundations of the castle or associated buildings. But I found it quite strange that a master mason and so much money was raised. And initially when I started thinking about this, thinking, oh, there's no reference to Ballymoon in all these records, as we know, and that's why it's such a mystery. Are they referring to Ballymoon through Fenagh? I wasn't sure. Anyway, I've kind of discounted it for now. So the constable at Fenagh Castle was William Cadell Jr., which was the new Sentinel's son. And then in 1285, the Carews established a manor at Dunleckney. The remnants of it are still there, just north, if you like, of the current church and graveyard there. There's a mound there, and they think there's a deserted medieval village there as well. And then very importantly for our story, Roger Bigot, he leads a revolt against Edward I in 1297. So what happens is Edward I Longshanks goes over to France, and he's in dispute with the King of France over areas in France. I think it's Gascony that they're disputing who owns it. And when he goes over, he sends back messages for them to raise money in England for this war effort. And basically, Bigot leads all the earls and says, no, we're not doing that. And so Edward had to climb down, and he had to give them back other rights and titles and so on. But what the upshot of it was that he obviously fell out of favour with Edward I. So into the early 14th century, he's out of favour now, Roger Bigot, and he's lost a lot of his power and his titles and so on. So to get it back, he agrees to pass his entire estate to the crown upon his death. So Bigot didn't actually have any direct heirs himself. So in 1306, he dies, and Ballymoon is now under the direct control of the crown, along with the Liberty of Carlow. When I refer to the Liberty of Carlow, it's County Carlow. It's also parts of Wicklow, Wexford, a little bit of Kilkenny. It's much bigger than the current County Carlow. So the crown are controlling it up till 1312, and Thomas of Brotherton becomes the Earl of Norfolk. So he's no relation to the Bigots. He's just appointed. He's just given this title. So when he becomes Earl of Norfolk, he gets the Liberty of Carlow, and ergo he also gets Ballymoon. So in 1315, we have the European-wide Great Famine. So that caused devastation across Europe. And then, in particular to Ireland, we have the Bruce invasions in 1315. The Bruces came over and caused havoc. They brought 3,000 or 4,000 soldiers over. They were trying to cause a new front against the English, and they travelled around Ireland, again, attacking towns and villages and so on. So also the 100 Years' War started with England and France, and that drew an awful lot of resources out of England, but also out of Ireland. And then in 1388, Thomas dies, and his daughter becomes Duchess of Norfolk, obviously taking over the Liberty of Carlow. And then we have the bubonic plague in 1346 to 53. Various records say that tens of millions, not hundreds of millions of people died. From 1350 onwards, we have what's called the Gaelic resurgence. That's where the Anglo-Normans are pushed back towards, say, the cities like Dublin, and the Gaelic families take back a lot of their lands, but not necessarily their titles during this period. And then in 1399, Margaret dies. Okay, so we've talked about who might have built it, who might have built Ballymoon. So let's talk about what and why. Okay, so what was built? We have a sub-square masonry castle with internal ranges and courtyard. So why? We have a castle built on the frontier between the Anglo-Norman and Gaelic-led communities. It's not a coincidence that it was built there. I mean, they could have built it elsewhere, but they built it very much on the frontier between where the MacMurrough Cabinets had control and the Anglo-Normans had control. So we have a large double-hooded fireplace in the Great Hall. So the castle was intended to entertain guests. We have at least 7 toilets, so there's a high status of residents or guests. We have between 3 and 5 high status accommodation units in and of themselves, so several equally ranked guests. Because normally in castles, if you think regular castles, even if you think of like Ballyloughlin Castle, even that's nearby, you have one kind of very high status accommodation suite and a big fireplace and so on, and then much lesser accommodation after that. So, but in Ballymoon, we don't see that at all. So the entranceway had a portcullis and a barbican or forework. So there was an efforts made to make entranceway defences, but overall there's a lack of defensive features. That additional defensive features are not seen to be required. I think those last two are actually in some way related. When you think of Ballymoon Castle and the layout of it, it's not really that interested in defence. But if you're a high status guest or resident coming into it, you see this forework and you see a portcullis, and you're impressed. And I think maybe that's why that was done, because why would you heavily fortify an entranceway and then leave all these walls around with no flanking fire, no protection? So I think those two might be related. So what I came to in all of this was who built it, what was built, why. So when I thought about who, I thought about what, I thought about why, and I was going around in circles. There was no answer. Like we talk about it being a mystery and so on, no idea who, what, why. We don't know. So I said to myself, there's an awful lot of work done on the extant remains, the upstanding remains. Lots of the eminent scholars on Irish castles have written about Ballymoon in a lot of detail. I'm not going to get anything more out of that. So what I decided to do was to actually do a geophysical survey of the surrounds of the castle, right, and see what we can learn, what's going on. Was it built in like around 1300 and then just left, or is there activity going on around it? So in phase one, generously funded by the Carlow Historical and Archaeological Society, we did the area that's marked out in red around the castle. The geophysicists actually did a little bit more area than we had agreed, free of charge, which was great. So it's a little bit bigger than we intended, but that was all good. And this is the grayscale results of what he found. So this is the kind of the raw sense of how they present geophysical results. So you see the grey in and of itself, and then you see the black lines. So the black lines are the stronger the black, the more sure we can be that there's archaeological features underneath the ground. Okay, so I looked at this and went, okay, that's extremely busy. I can't make head nor tail of that. So I said to myself, okay, we do know that there's a north-south trackway here. That was already known through aerial photographs. Now it seems there's an east-west trackway here, and it does look like there are plots on the north side of that. But there's an awful lot of other stuff going on there as well. And then I said, okay, if the east-west trackway isn't contemporary with these plots, are they bigger? And then I said, okay, I have no idea, because in the sense that we see that there are archaeological cut features under the ground, but we don't know what's contemporary with what. We just couldn't know. So this is the interpretation from the geophysicist of what he understood. He himself has been doing this for 20 or 30 years, of what he understood was the strongest possibility of archaeological features. In the first instance, I just mentioned this black circle here. This is what he believes is a prehistoric enclosure dating to hundreds of years prior to the activity around the castle. So we can leave that out for now. But the dark blue are what he believes are the kind of most definite archaeological cut features, or the remnants thereof, of foundations for houses or foundations for boundaries and so on and so forth. And then he has the medium blue, and then he has the green, less so again, and then he has the orange in what he believes are field systems. And I thought to myself, what am I going to do with that? If one would expect to get a deserted medieval village, one would expect, I'll show you, there's actually a later slide in it, but one would expect a nice, obvious trackway, houses outside that, and then plots behind that for growing vegetables and so on. That is not what we have there. It's so busy. Okay, so I said to myself, we really need to finish off this geophysical survey, okay? And we need to complete the survey across the entire site. So what was done in the second phase of works in September 2022 that was funded by the Community Monuments Fund, we did the remaining part of this field with the moated site. If any of you know where that is, when you go into the castle or through there, the moated site is there. This field here to the east, I guess, of the castle field, as I call it. And then we did a second method. The geophysicist suggested a second geophysical method of electromagnetic induction. The science of it is quite difficult, but he said it's much better at refining very detailed results. So that's what we did in the second survey. So these are the results in the northern field. Much less busy than around the castle, There are the orange field systems. Again, there's probably a prehistoric monument here. So that's the second prehistoric monument we've probably uncovered as part of this. New monuments not known before. You have your moated site here underneath trees, and then you have these linears that may be related to the moated site, and then possible field systems, but nothing concrete. Then you have the eastern field. The white dots are random bits of iron, ferrous reactions, and the kind of yellow squiggles are differences in subsoil. This, to me, was very striking because this is completely blank. Now, you can see here how busy it is in the castle field. This is completely blank. This is obviously, the drainage feature that exists today is obviously the boundary, and was the boundary for the activity, the extent of activity around Ballymoon Castle. So there it is in its entirety. So you get a sense of what we're looking at here. This is incredibly busy around here. Nothing at all. And then we have some activity up here as you go back towards the moated site. So this tells me that this is probably the limit or the extent of a manor or town or village or whatever you'd like to call it around Ballymoon Castle. But we still don't know when that dates to. So the EMI, as I mentioned earlier, so this is refining the results. So again, we see, I'd love to have a pointer. Again, we see the north-south trackway here, that's there. We're seeing elements of that east-west trackway I mentioned earlier. And we're seeing how busy it is around. And you see the shapes, it's all curvilinear. There's things cutting across, it's everywhere. And what he did highlight was these two buildings. So he believes they're buildings. And that one there may be a building with a plot around it. So some good results, but again, incredibly busy. So this is the two buildings I mentioned, so he's after highlighting these. So there's a good chance they're medieval buildings. Okay, so what struck me next, I think when I was looking at this was, I saw how busy this was here and where it was. And then I opened up one of the early first edition Northern Survey maps from the 1830s. And you can see there quite clearly the shape, this shape here, as it comes around here, is exactly what that is there. So that's the boundary of a village or town or manor around Ballymoon Castle. So this is what you typically would expect to see, just to point that out. So this is a deserted medieval village in England. Thank you, John. And you see the routeway here, the central kind of trackway or street, if you like. And then you have these plots here. These would be the house plots, and then your gardens behind. So this is what I was hoping to find. But no, this is not what we found. And another point I want to make in this, I'll come around to this again, is this is a modern map of Tullow town, the centre of Tullow. This is from the 1830s again. This is the Market Square. You have the Market Square. You have Mill Street. You have Church Street. You have the Bridge Street. They're all there. The layout is the exact same for 200 years later. So when a site is continuously occupied, the buildings themselves may change, their functions and use may change, but the layout of the town or the urban area stays the same. And this is showing it 200 years apart. Okay, so that's the village in and of itself, I believe, is what we have here. So I'm going to take you on a slight detour, if you don't mind, but I'm going to bring this back around. So it relates. So this is something that struck me a few weeks ago, and it's a working theory at the moment. Munavyog, what is in a name? So these are the historical references to Munavyog and to Ballymoon. The earliest one for Ballymoon is in 1280. They come from the Carew papers. As we know, the Carews were in the area. And it goes down all the way through. And so you have a reference in 1612 to Ballymoon. I pointed out because the first reference to Moneybeg or Munavyog is in 1612. That's the first reference we have. And it's not until 1781 that we have a reference to Bagnallstown as it's known by most people today. So I've just called these out, right? So it's especially the first one. So 1612, we have a Ballymoon and a Moneybeg. In 1655, we have a Ballymoney and a Moneybeg. And in 1685, we have a Ballymoney and Moneybeg. This is it's quite blurry. This is I suppose, the later ownership of Ballymoon. So this will relate back to what I'm talking about. So Peter Carew has some dubious claim against the MacMurraghs that he should have the lands around Ballymoon and the area of Carlow, because they were there in the early 1300s. And the court in Dublin finds in his favour. And so in 1268, he's officially now the owner of the area. He's often referred to as Peter Crewe the Elder, because there was a Peter Crewe the Younger as well, who was his nephew. So when he died in 1575, Peter Crewe died in 1580. So he had for 5 years. This is the Peter Crewe the Younger who died in the Battle of Glenmalure. So that's him. And so when he dies, his son George, that's his brother actually, George takes over. So George is now here, right? And in 1585, it's said that Nicholas Bagnall, the first time the name Bagnall comes in, buys the land off George Carew for his son Dudley. But his son Dudley dies in 1587, when he actually predeceased his father. And then Nicholas, his son again, the Dudley son, takes over, and then we have a George Bagnall who built the original Dunleckney Manor. So there are references to Nicholas Bagnall. This Nicholas Bagnall and this George Bagnall here. There are references to them to living in Ballymoon. So we have references to them. We know they only built Dunleckney Manor. The dates they range from about 1612 to about 1620 or 25 that they say the first manor was finished. Not exactly clear, but they're living in Ballymoon since the 1580s. So they're there for 30 years or more. So the origins of a name. So in 1612, George Bagnall of Ballymoon was granted the entire barony of Idrone, otherwise Idrone, and all the hereditaments called or known by the same Idrone, the manor, castle, town, and lands of Ballymoon. It's a manor castle, and it's a town. So in 1612, there is a town and manor at Ballymoon. The Bagnalls also own all lands in the region, including those of present-day Monavioug. Maybe some of you know what I'm getting at here. Is the origin of the name Monavioug Little Munya or Little Ballymoon? Maybe it's a working theory at the moment, but you have a Ballymunya and you have a Munya Viog. And so we know that there was a settlement around Ballymoon that was large, and the Bagnalls were living there. They owned all the land, and the habitation around, or the hamlet as it probably was at the time, was set up at Monavioug. So it also says, if this was the case, it also says if there's a little Munya, there's a big Munya, so that's Ballymoon. Okay, so in summary, Ballymoon Castle was changed and adapted to changing circumstances by different occupiers from its construction onto the mid-17th century. What I'm trying to say there is that when I say that the geophysical results are very hard to interpret, they're all over the place, and the point about Tullow staying the same through the 2 centuries, what I'm trying to say is that I think the only way to account for those geophysical results in how complicated they are and the fact that they overlap each other is that there was a settlement in Ballymoon, probably when it was being built, and then it was abandoned. And then the MacMurragh Cavanists took over, and then that was abandoned. And then the Bagnalls took over as well, and they abandoned it when they built. So I think that there were periods where there was a village or a manor around Ballymoon, and it was resettled, or it was abandoned, and it was resettled, and not respecting the previous one. So I think that the village around it actually felt like it actually was completely gone, and they rebuilt on it. So it appears there was a repeated use of abandonment during this period. While the upstanding remains are very impressive, the below ground remains add significantly to our knowledge and life of the castle. And we need to strongly reconsider seeing Ballymoon as an unfinished masonry castle sitting idly in a farmland setting, instead of as a valuable resource utilised for 300 years or more. So we know the Carews were there; they cared about it. We know that they were there. The Bagnalls were there. So throughout the whole period, the MacMurragh Cavanists were there. Throughout that whole period, the castle was continuously used. We think it was abandoned, but then it was kind of retaken over. So the narrative of the unfinished castle is a popular one and often appears regularly in discussions on its owner, purpose and use. I think it's more apt to say the idea that there was an ongoing evolution of the castle rather than simply an unfinished castle. As part of this, I also think as a possibility there may also have been devolution, or it might have devolved or regressed. What I mean by that is that we know the Bagnalls occupied the castle and had a manor here, and they built the original Dunleckney manor while they were living here. Instead of it being unfinished to a uniform level, was it reduced back to a uniform level? Because everyone says that it must have been finished to a uniform level because of circumstances. I think it's just as likely that the Bagnalls were building the manor, they were living in Ballymoon, and they said, okay, here's free stone, here's some cut stone. You know, it happened in Ballyloughlin, right? You go to Ballyloughlin, you see what happened out there. That they may have taken the stone down and they may have used it in Dunleckney. And also, that would have decreased construction costs at Dunleckney, but it also had the added benefit of leaving behind a less attractive residence for anyone who may have considered squatting rights or taking over. So they couldn't have left this massive masonry castle, you know, in a state where it was very easily defendable. So it's a theory at the moment, but I think it's just as likely as it stopped at the same exact level all the way around. Okay, to conclude. The castle may not have been finished to the original builder's vision and design, but it certainly was finished to the extent that it was occupied, changed, and adapted to the changing circumstances of their later medieval period. The MacMurroughs, Carews, and Bagnalls viewed the castle of Ballymoon as a fortified residence to control and suitable and profitable for a manorial settlement. And I think the last point is most important for me. The masonry castle demanded that those wishing to control the region around the castle for 3 to 4 centuries following its construction also needed to exert power over the occupation and use of the castle. So I think Roger Bigot built the castle. I think it stopped when he died. I think the MacMurroughs took over the castle. The Carews might have been around for a little while after that, but then the MacMurroughs took it over. They may have had a settlement there. Then Peter Carew, the senior, came along and demanded that he gets it. They apparently lived around Ballymoon as well. And then the Bagnalls came along and bought it up as well. We have the evidence of the geophysical results showing us extremely busy but defined edges of a village and crossing over each other. So things were built over, not respecting what was there earlier. And I think then it was abandoned by the Bagnalls, but the Bagnalls still controlled the land. So they took this, I think they may have taken some of the stone over to Dunleckney to build Dunleckney Manor, the first version of Dunleckney Manor. Okay, just to thank a couple of people and so on. I'd like to thank the Carlow Historical and Archaeological Society for their ongoing support. Much appreciated. I'd like to thank the Carlow Library and Museum because they access to resources and so on. The Community Monuments Fund for funding the second phase. Target Archaeological Geophysics for carrying out all the geophysics and being like a partner in all of this to work out what we needed to do next. And then the landowner Paul Sheil of Ballymoon House for his ongoing support. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have you any questions or comments?
Thank you very much. The possibility then of excavating what is, and I think in the introduction to the lecture you said it's probably a 300-year use of the there. What are the challenges and the costs of digging it up?
Yeah, it's very challenging and it's very costly. So it would be my intention to try and proceed with that, but it takes time and it takes particular funding sources to be able to do that, because getting a geophysical survey done is one thing, excavation is very expensive. Yeah.
You say geophysical survey. How is that done? It's not like LiDAR, like the laser thing where they shoot down and they see into the ground. It's
somewhat like LiDAR, yeah. The one that we used for most of it was magnetometry, so that's magnetic interactions. Beyond that, I'm not a technical expert in it, but it is like that, yeah, like scanning, yeah.
Have you ever compared Dunleckney, like the architecture and the features in Dunleckney with Ballymoon?
No, I haven't. No, the current building that's there, I think dates to the 1820s, or I'm not sure exactly when, so it's a lot older. I haven't seen during building works, or renovations. I think in the 50s or 60s, they did come across some very early remains that they reckoned were the first building, but I haven't seen them. No.
Have you come across any connection with the Knights Templar with Ballymoon Castle?
Yes. Yeah.
What connections did the company discover?
It was written about in the 1740s by two travellers to Ireland who were English travellers, and they mistook the townslands' names with Ballywilliam Row with another townland near Clonegall, where the Knights Templars actually had lands. And I think the idea of it seems to have kind of grown legs and been referenced down through the years on that, but the origin of it was in the 1748, I think, was the origin of it. Yeah.
What the graveyard in Dundee, aren't there supposed to be a Knights Templar graves there?
I'm not aware if there are. I don't know that there are. Yeah.
Check it out.
Yeah, definitely will. Yeah.
Do we have any artifacts now from the site at all to kind of give more?
No. There's a reference to a suit of armour and a diamond necklace found in a publication in 1846. Well, I don't know of their whereabouts. Yeah. But to that man's point earlier, we'll do some excavation, hopefully, and we'll get some artifacts.
If you did identify, it must be a treasure trove then.
I would imagine so. I would imagine over the years, yeah. And picking it apart, especially if it's going to be overlapping activity, picking that apart is really interesting,
Do we have any kind of written accounts of life there? Or,
No.
Any kind of...
No. And it is quite a strange one, because there are the exchequer rolls, as they're called, from when Bigot was here, so we think he built it, and they're really detailed, and they account for everything. And if you read them, like, they're talking about giving the keeper of forests somewhere 3 sheep for his work, but they don't mention the castle and the cost of that. Like, we're talking about like the equivalent of tens of millions probably in its day, but there's no reference to it for some reason anywhere. And that's why when I said it earlier, I got my spidey senses up when I was reading about Fenagh, but there is no Fenagh Castle. And I suppose just to be aware as well, when I made a point about Roger Bigot and how he fell out with the king, he was a magnate. Roger Bigot, he was very, very rich. He was the equivalent of a billionaire today. And he owed the king loads of money at various points. He owed Italian bankers loads of money at various points. So I don't know, was he hiding some resources? I don't know, because it is incredibly strange that it doesn't exist.
Last question.
Yeah.
The point where it become vacated for any length of time was when the Bible was left. Previous to that, you say it's been continuously occupied.
I don't know that it's been continuously occupied. I think that it's known that the Carews petitioned to get it off the MacMurraghs. So the Carews, Bigot died in 1306. They think the Carews at that point stayed around into the first couple of decades of the 1300s, and then the MacMurraghs completely take over. So that window between that, maybe around 1320 up to that 1568 date, when Peter Carew got the lands, it was the MacMurraghs who had it. It may have been abandoned. So it may have been the initial building phase, which I said would have gone on for years. There was surely settlement around it. People would have to live there and so on. Did the MacMurraghs make an attempt? But they wouldn't have left the castle there unoccupied. You couldn't. You just couldn't. You imagine that if you put 20 or 30 soldiers into a castle like that, how many, 200 or 300 it would take to get them out? Yeah. You know what I mean? So you just couldn't leave it like that. So there was going to be some habitation of it all along. It was too valuable a resource. Yeah.
Are you aware that there is a deserted village, Castlemore?
Yes.
And Geophysical survey was all available online.
Oh, very good.
And Roger Bigot was involved there as well.
Okay, very good. Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, do you know where the rumour of unfinished came from? I mean, it's been repeated in every piece of.
Well, when you look at it, it looks unfinished. Because there's
who said that first, though?
I mean, it's been said all along. Like, it's, even they say the scholars Leask said it in 1944. Like, Tycho O'Keefe has said it. He gave a talk to us in 2016 on it. Tom McNeil is another well-known castle expert. He said it because when you look at it, it looks like it's unfinished. But like, Why would they pay to take it up to a certain point?
No,
I just found it strange. Yeah. Yeah. I suppose you look at it and you say, okay, it has no battlements. You know, it has no parapet. Like you know what I mean, to defend it at that level, and that's like a prerequisite for having a medieval castle. You know. Yeah.
Any further questions or comments?
Would you mentioned the apartment for high status individuals.
Yeah.
Who might they have been?
Well, intended for, it would have been, I imagine it would have been people that bigot wanted to entertain. Yeah. Yeah.
I think Bigot was only here once, is that right?
I believe there is a reference in being here in 1266, but I'm not sure. 1279 seems to be the more sure one. Yeah.
I kind of wonder what he was doing building it.
I don't know. That's a very good question. I don't know why he was building it. You know.
Another thing, just one more point about the site itself. Is there any kind of an idea that there might have been a church there?
A church?
As a village, it would mean a church.
Yes. In manorial settlements, you would expect a church. There may very well have been a church, but it may not have been built from stone, because everything was going into the structure of the castle to get that up first, and they may have intended to build a church in stone later.
Perhaps one of those yellow buildings.
Perhaps. Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And during excavations, there wouldn't be an expectation of finding any like high value artifacts. It would be more just archaeologically significant artifacts.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, let's see if you have any questions. On behalf of the society, I'll ask Shane Murphy to propose a vote of thanks.
So this is my first time attending one of these lectures in a very long time, and it was a great one to come back to as well. So, like you started the evening off there, Stephen, remembering your father, and like what a way to be remembered. You started out, you brought us on a tour, like a kind of a visual walk through Ballymoon Castle, rebuilt it basically in our minds first. We had genealogy, 2 sets of genealogy, the place name evidence. And like you said, there's the title Keith was here 7 years ago and put up a very convincing argument, I suppose, and like as you say, building on previous theories that the place has been unfinished, but you put a much more convincing argument, I suppose, forward this evening. For me anyway, that like the castle probably was occupied. And then as well as that, to interpret all those squiggles, those lines all across the field, to rebuild a whole town, a whole manor that we've lost in Carlow today. But I suppose it kind of also feels like this lecture, despite how much detail was in it, how much we found out about Castle, how much we found out about the kind of place name evidence, family history, everything, that it's just maybe just an introduction. And we've maybe seen only the beginnings of a lot of very exciting new information to come for Carlow's history. On behalf of the society, we'll propose a vote of thanks.